Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to RadioFreeRhinecliff.org. In this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Kay Larson. Kay, hi, thanks for being here.
Hi.
Kay, who's an author and a journalist, an art critic, or once upon a time an art critic, and a seriously devoted and practicing Buddhist. And just before the theme music ended, we were talking about the Hawkeye Rebellion, or you were talking about, because I know nothing about it. What is the Hawkeye Rebellion?
So I was born in eastern Iowa, and it turned out that Hawkeye was a very famous Indian leader who, the tribe was based in Illinois, right across the river from in the Mississippi, right across from Iowa. And I've been through that area, actually, myself driving through there. It's a very beautiful place. It's a plateau along the edge of the Mississippi, and they had fields there. These are Indians in the 1700s, basically, early 1800s. They had created a utopia of streets with, divided into blocks, and with maps, and with they hunted and grew their own food. Anyway, then the whites came in, and one of them was my great I always get this wrong, grandfather. My grandmother's grandfather, 4 removed from her, so it's 5 removed from 6 removed from me. Nonetheless, he was the first settler in that part of eastern Iowa in 1838, and my descendants directly descended from him in that area. So
what was his name?
His name was
oh yeah, so putting you on the spot. And did he cross paths with this chief Hawkeye?
Well, the reason, see, I've been doing research into my family's early history, and the reason that he could move into Iowa, and it wasn't called Iowa then, it wasn't even Iowa territory, it was just a bunch of open wilderness. The reason he could move in is that the army had already cleared out the Indians.
Oh. And
there were still some Indians of other tribes in that area. They were part of the Sauk and Fox, and they were involved with I'm not going to go into the deep history of it, but anyway, the Indians in this paradise that they had created were not ready for the Missouri Compromise on the southern. It was a little bit later. I'm sorry, I'm messing up my history. They weren't ready for the fact that the whites were moving in, and while the Indians were out hunting on their traditional hunting episodes to the north, the whites moved into that area and settled in their houses and fought them when the Indians came back. And so Hawkeye was this famous chief who tried to lead his people, and it was one disaster after another. Anyway. But
now Iowa is known as the Hawkeye State.
But now Iowa is known, and so are the football teams, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Iowa State Hawkeyes, is that right?
Iowa State Hawkeyes, right.
So you're doing a book, is that right? You're researching your family history in Iowa for a book that you're working on?
Yes, well, there's research that my grandmother gave me when she was still alive, of oral histories that my family created about those early settlers.
So were there oral histories? Your grandma gave them to you orally from her memory?
No.
Oh, somebody wrote them down along the way.
They were interviewed by, very soon after that area was settled, a newspaper began. And they wisely said, there's a whole story behind this that I'm not going to say. But anyway, it was a very interesting guy who created this newspaper. He was deaf. And he created a newspaper. Nonetheless, they took all these oral histories. They said, our first settlers are getting old. We've got to find out what they were doing back then. And so they wrote them down. And this has been passed on through my family to my grandmother, who gave them to me. So I have a stack that high, of these oral histories. Plus my father, at the end of his life, was working on an autobiography which included every moment of his life, including the very early era when there was virtually nobody there.
Right. In eastern Iowa.
Eastern Iowa.
What was the name of the town where they...
Well, so it's called Anamosa, and it is the town literally where Grant Wood was born.
Oh, nice.
I didn't know that at the time.
Grant Wood, the painter, American
Grant
regionalist.
Wood, American Gothic, the painter that everybody knows.
Yeah.
A painting that turns out to be based on Leonardo da Vinci.
Really?
Yes, but I won't tell all that story either, but I'm working on it.
We got plenty of time. Well, what Da Vinci works or work is that based on?
It's based on the painter that influenced Da Vinci.
Okay. Gotcha.
Leonardo. And that same painter, Grant Wood studied his works when Grant Wood went to Europe.
Huh. It's amazing. And for people who might not know, it's called American Gothic. It's one of the most famous American paintings. It's a farmer holding a pitchfork, I think, and his wife.
Right. Well, it's probably his daughter.
Okay.
In the painting,
standing in front of their house.
Right. And it's deeply symbolic, that painting, and it's also based, if you think about it, it's based in the same posing structure as the Mona Lisa. And it has that same mildly confrontational ambiguity about it, right? Who are these people? Who is the Mona Lisa? Who are these two farmers? What are they doing there? What are they looking out at me for? What stories do they have? And so forth.
I'd say this, the looks on their faces are kind of dour, whereas the Mona Lisa's, people are like, oh, well, we don't know what kind of
Well,
face
she's a little dour, too.
Okay. Good.
And they're not as dour as you think they are.
Yeah.
These people were very serious people. They had to keep themselves... The individual farmers back then had to make everything they owned, everything they did,
right?
Everything they ate, everything they built.
Your point is like today, those people would be smiling for like a selfie, but back then it was tough.
Nobody smiled for selfies.
Back then.
I don't even mean metaphorically or any other way.
Right.
You were considered flippant if you were.
So when did you first discover that this was the birthplace of Grant Wood, the place where you grew up?
Well, it's not when I discovered it. It's when I discovered that there's this whole context in my life that I knew nothing about.
Right.
And my moment occurred when I went through the Whitney Museum's Grant Wood exhibition a few years back. And I was pointing to each painting and I said, I know that place. I know that place. I know that river. It's called the Wapsipinicon. Runs through the town. It's where my grandmother and I used to go fishing on that river.
Okay, what a freaky moment.
It was pretty amazing.
Through this show and recognizing all the locales depicted in these paintings.
Yes. And then I was standing next to a guy.
And this a few years ago.
Whenever the Grant Wood exhibition at the Whitney was about.
I just want to point this out. This is after a lifetime in the arts as an art critic, having studied art in college, and really.
Actually, I was an artist in college.
Okay, so I assume you studied some art, history as well. So after a whole lifetime of being in that realm,
right.
So
and visiting that town over and over again because my grandparents lived there until they died.
Right.
And it was the center of our family's life, and we always came back to that place. It was like a mecca in our own lives. We always came back to it, and I didn't know any of this history.
Right.
And then there I am walking through the Whitney exhibition, and I'm pointing to these paintings, and I say, do you know the painting of there are two bluffs on the far side of a river, and there's a bridge.
Yeah.
And there's a little white building on the right side of it.
Maybe.
Yeah, anyway. So I'm standing at that painting, and I'm saying, oh, that river is the Wapsipinicon, where my grandmother used to take me to fish. And the guy next to me points to the white building, and he says, yes, that's the old general store. And I have a cousin, he said to me, and his name is Larson, which is my name. So I said, hallelujah, this, what I didn't know about where I'm from becomes very interesting to me. And then my father, in the last half of his life, he was a football coach in the first half of his life. Last half of his life, he was writing a book because he stopped coaching football, moved to California and stopped coaching. He was writing his own autobiography about growing up in that place. So I have all his reasoning, everything he did, wandering around those hills all by himself. It's sort of like a Tom Sawyer story.
It must be an amazing thing to read.
It's astonishing. It tells me all kinds of things that I didn't know.
And did it tell you anything that you didn't want to know?
Actually, it elucidated a lot that I did want to know, because my father was a very angry guy. Mm-hmm. He was a football coach.
Bless you.
And it was his whole life. Everything revolved around football as far as he was concerned. I was a deep disappointment to him, because I not only couldn't care less, I couldn't stand it.
Okay.
I was reading books all the time, and that freaked him out.
Right.
But now I find out the whole backstory, and he has a very interesting backstory. He was wandering the hills just like Tom Sawyer, all by himself. He built his own boat by popping planks off of an old building and joining them together, and then he'd run down the river in this boat, and fish from it and so forth, until someone stole it.
Oh boy. And so did this sort of autobiography of your dad shine any light on why he was an angry guy?
Yeah. Because everybody was angry back then. Because there was so much struggle.
Right.
And it was so hard. And my grandfather, my father's father, is quoted by my dad as saying that until he was 9 or 10 years old, he couldn't get off the back fence of the one-room school that they were all attending, because he would be beaten up by the bigger kids.
Oh, right.
So my grandfather taught my father and my father's two brothers to fight fists.
And did they get in fights? Did you ever see your pop get in a fight?
Oh, my father, yes. And not only that, but we would be sitting at dinner somewhere, and all of a sudden he'd get up and he'd charge somebody.
Really?
Yes. And say, "I saw you looking at me."
Oh, boy.
And what are you going to do about it? And the other guy would say, "No, I'm not doing anything about it. Don't worry about that."
And was your dad a big guy?
Oh, yeah. He was like, 250 pounds, all muscle.
Uh-huh.
He's a football player.
Football
Coach.
And like his ancestors from Sweden, perhaps?
His father,
Larson?
his father's family was from Sweden.
Okay.
His mother's family, my grandmother, was the one who can trace her lineage all the way back to the first settler in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have siblings?
I do. I have two brothers, yeah.
And did any of them sort of pick up your dad's temper?
Actually, it's the opposite. Me and both of my brothers independently at some point made a resolve that we were not going to live that way. We were not. I remember, and I was 2 years old at the time. I remember when I did it. When I made that.
2 years old?
I was 2 years old. And I said, and he was throwing plates at my mother. And I said, "The war has started," to myself. I didn't, of course, say it in these words because I didn't have the language. But I made a commitment. I was not going to live that way. I was going to rescue her, and I was going to fight him.
And how did that go?
He didn't like it very much.
Did you rescue? Were you successful rescuing her?
Well, that's a child's ambition.
Sure.
But in a certain sense, in many senses, I did, yes.
And presumably you discussed this with your brothers. They know the story of you at two resolving to.
No, actually, we just all independently resolved this ourselves, each one of us.
Right.
And both of my brothers are basically pacifists in their dealings with all people. They will not get angry.
Oh.
They will go out of their way to avoid that.
Well, God bless the whole lot of you for being the end of the road of that, because that kind of stuff just keeps filtering down through generations. And it keeps filtering through Iowa politics right now. I don't want to go there because I don't want to characterize all Iowans. Because there are some people who are very passionately anti-violence.
I mean, friends of mine back there. So I don't want to, I don't want to make blanket statements about a state full of people.
Right.
But nonetheless, that history of violence is not just in Iowa, It's all the way through.
Sure.
The American history.
Yeah. It was interesting what you said that, back then, 4 generations ago, everybody was angry.
Yeah.
They were all mad. And they had to be, and it was a part of surviving.
Actually, my grandmother was not angry. The women weren't.
Okay.
The women weren't. The men were.
And did you have a close relationship with your grandparents?
Yes, they were the people who saved my life. As my father was screaming and throwing plates and my mother was sobbing, my grandparents saved my life.
Oh.
Yeah.
What a thing. So now you're writing a book about your youth and about Iowa and its role in your family and all that stuff. Is this a part of the book?
Oh, very much. This and Grant Wood. Grant Wood is also very much part of this book, because, I'm an art critic. I've been an art critic since I entered college as an artist.
Right.
And I don't know if you know Jim Terrell, the artist.
Sure.
He was a couple of grades ahead of me in the same place.
Somebody I knew wrote an article about sleeping in the Rodin crater.
I wrote an article about sleeping in Rodin crater.
Yeah.
Yes, and so I have known Jim Terrell since I was a freshman in college.
Wow.
And I was an artist at the time, and then I got involved in philosophy because, I don't know, I'm curious about everything,
Right.
So I actually, life history moment. I graduated from college with a degree in philosophy, a minor in studio art, and a year in actual journalism practice.
Okay. Writing
which you're going to ask me about, and I'll tell you.
Okay. Writing for the school newspaper or something?
No. Real journalism.
Okay.
So, end of my sophomore year.
Yeah.
The war with my father was so intense that he disowned me, which is ironic because he had nothing to disown me from.
Right.
But he kicked me out of the house, and I said, "That's fine, I'm leaving." And at the end of my junior year, I said, "I am not going to go back and spend a summer there with them. I'm not going to do it." So, in a sense, my father gave me my career, because I said, well, in that case, what am I going to do? I need a job. And the thought literally crossed my mind that there's only one thing that anybody would actually hire me to do, and that's writing. I don't know where that thought came from, but I just decided that that's what I was going to do. And so I wrote a letter to every newspaper in Southern California.
Now you're at Pomona College, is that right?
At Pomona College, that's right.
Okay, where is that located exactly?
That's in Southern California. Okay. That's in Southern California. It's in Orange County, basically.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I think it's not. It's on the edge of Orange. Anyway, it's near Riverside. It's between Riverside and East LA. Anyway, Pomona College. So I wrote a letter to every newspaper. I went to the library, and I got the address of every newspaper in Southern California, and I wrote them each one of them a letter. One answered. And
this is the 60s, 70s.
This was this is the end of my junior year, so I would have been 60. It would have been 67, something like that.
When newspapers were just thriving.
Yeah, there were small newspapers thriving too. They were community newspapers, which is what this was. And they survived on advertising, and the advertising was socially useful because you could find all kinds of things you needed, including apartments and roommates and things like that.
This is the newspaper who replied to your query.
Right. That's right.
And what were they called?
It was called. Oh God, I knew you were gonna ask me that.
I know all these pop quizzes.
I just talked to a friend of mine about how all the drawers stick shut these days.
I'll remember. I'll remember. I like that analogy.
I'm sure it's not around now.
Well, but what were you writing for them?
So, this is a newspaper. It's a community newspaper in northern San Diego County.
Okay.
And it's got 6 area editions because advertisers in each of these editions will buy for their own local area. So you've got 6 area editions which means that this newspaper comes out and the back part of it is all the same.
Gotcha.
But the front page or two is local news, quote unquote, of one of these 6-area editions.
Love that.
Yeah, it's great. And so I walk in, they say, yeah, a reporter's leaving for a year, you can come in and we'll hire you. I walk in without having a clue. I had never done any journalism. I had never worked on a newspaper.
You had no samples.
I had no samples whatsoever. I just wrote them and said, I'm looking for, and they wrote me back. So I walk in, and this scene is just such...
It's astonishing.
I wish I could make a film about this in a way, because I walk in, I'm then I'm, junior in college, I'm like, I forget how old I am, but pretty young. And
20, 21.
Yeah, hair, blonde hair down my back, and there's this desk in this little room. There's a desk, and there's the managing editor who's sitting like across one side of the table, the desk, and on the other side is the editor who has a few spines so he can only turn around.
Oh, jeez.
And look at you this way. So, and I walk in, and the editor says, here's a press release. It's about children dying in swimming pools in Southern California summers. Write it up. Okay. So I did. Where did I come up with this? I have no idea. How did I do this? I have no idea to this day. But he liked it enough that he put it as a banner story over the 6-area editions.
Jeez.
And then he sat me down one day and he said, here's how you write for a newspaper. Here's pyramidal structure. Pyramidal structure is the most important thing first, and then you build the pyramid of information about that, and then you end with a kicker, which is the final like twist of the knife, so to speak. That was all the instructions I ever received. And he handed me a camera, and I discovered I love the photographs because it meant I had to write less copy.
Oh, geez. If the photo is good enough, they'd make it bigger.
Exactly, and then I didn't have to write as much.
I love the way fate is taking a hand in
fate is
your
like,
interests
fate is like grabbing me by the back of the neck and dragging me off, because of my father's anger.
Right.
My father's anger impelled me into this place where I didn't have a clue about what I was doing. Right. But I had to find out.
But it's also really just ridiculous that one letter from some co-ed at Pomona State, the guy would be like, oh, yeah, hire her. Right?
Well, but they had a reporter who was leaving. They needed somebody to fill it. My letter showed up. Why not?
Well, because you don't have any samples, you don't have any experience, you're only 19 or whatever.
It was a very different era.
Long blonde.
By then there was although this was not an alternative paper in the classic sense, like the Berkeley Barb or the Village Voice or so forth. Those publications did exist at that point, and they were supplying, basically free copy space to anybody who had a cogent reason to write for them.
Gotcha.
So then what happened was I put a year in there at that newspaper, and I came back and finished out my senior year at Pomona, graduated, ended up on the East Coast, and somebody said that there's a local newspaper there. It's a cooperative paper like the Village Voice. Okay. Community. I mean, it's written by a bunch of young people like me, right? And somebody said they're looking for an art critic.
What paper was this?
This is called the Real Paper.
Okay.
You can look it up in Wikipedia. It's famous now.
Is it? How come?
Yeah. Because it was like the Berkeley Barb or the Village Voice. It was one of the few papers that was created out of the anti-war movement, the gay rights movement, the women's rights movement, all the social ferment of the time.
Okay.
Right.
So let me just go back. You did the summer at this.
I did the summer, thing. But then I extended it for another 6 months.
And then you finished up at Pomona State.
Right.
And somebody said, "Oh, there's a writing gig at a paper."
No. So I spent 6 months at the San Diego Sentinel. That's what it was called.
Oh, good.
Sorry, the drawers get stuck at my age.
Yeah.
I finished up the 6 months at San Diego Sentinel, and I said I better keep going. So I continued on for another 6 months.
Okay.
So by the time I came back to Pomona, I just had my senior year to finish out.
Okay.
Right? So I finished the senior year, and then a friend of mine was driving to the East Coast, and he said, if you want to go east, I'll give you a ride. What am I going to do? Go back home? Stay there? Look for a job?
No way.
No way. So I said, okay.
And did you pass through Iowa on your way east?
No, not with him. No, not with that on that ride. No. But
Not
I
with
passed
him.
through.
And who was the him? Was he a romantic interest? Oh, you're making a good face. I want to dig more in this story.
You will not get very far because I won't let you.
Well, you're making a good
Put
face.
it this way.
Yeah.
I got a ride with him from
Yeah.
the west to the east.
Mm-hmm.
And on the East Coast, I found out that there was this paper called The Real Paper in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right.
And they said they're looking for an art critic. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. And then I said, wait a minute. I have studio art practice, and including a studio art show in my senior year.
Right.
Philosophy and history of ideas. That was my major.
Right.
And a year of practical journalism experience.
Now you've got clippings.
And I've got clippings.
Right.
Yeah, but I didn't need the clippings, actually. Nobody looked at the clippings.
Oh,
Just in the local newspaper, for God's sake. Nobody looked at the clippings, but what they did was they said, well, okay, write us a sample review.
okay.
And I did.
And do you remember what the sample review was?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
So let me back up. You had a show from your studio
Senior show.
Senior show. And was it sculpture or photography or paintings
It was
or
boxes of light.
boxes of light?
Yes.
Okay.
It was cubes constructed of half silver glass.
Okay.
So that half silver glass is half mirrored. So that if you put a light source inside the cube, not only will the light penetrate outside the box to your own eyes, it will also reflect back inside the box.
Okay.
And it creates an infinity
Right.
of boxes retreating on all sides.
Sounds so
Beyond the edge of the quote-unquote reality of the box.
cool.
Okay. And, I put various colors in them. I did various configurations. So basically that was my senior show.
Sounds pretty cool. Do you still have the pieces?
I have one of them.
You do?
And I have photographs of them.
I want to see.
Okay.
What a treat.
I'll give them
And
to
did
you.
they have titles, do you recall?
No, you wouldn't want to title these. It was a phenomenon of light.
Okay.
And I had said to my art professor, I wanted to make something about angels. And he said, okay, sure, go ahead. I mean, he was brilliant. He was the greatest teacher. I said something, it was totally loopy what I said. And very unfashionable. He said, yeah, go ahead.
Very unfashionable. Because it's the late 60s. It's
the late 60s. Nobody does angels in the late
height
60s.
of sort of countercultural hipness.
Yeah.
So did you get graded on this senior show?
Yeah, I did.
And how'd you do? You graduated.
I did very well. I'll say I did very well. They actually got me into graduate school, but then I decided I'd go east instead.
And which graduate school did they want you to go to?
UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine.
Okay.
Which had a lot of major artists there at that point.
Right. And you might have done that, but you had a crush on this guy who was driving east.
No, it was not it.
I'm baiting you. I'm sorry.
I know you are. Tough luck. No, I needed a paycheck.
Right.
I mean, what am I going to do? How am I going to support myself? Where am I going to live on?
Right.
I had to have a job. My parents were not going to support me.
Right. All right. Let me just stop in Iowa on our way east
Okay.
to this the Real Paper there in Cambridge.
Yeah.
How was your mom doing through this, and what was your relationship like to her, who you probably still on some level wanted to save?
Oh yeah, my mother was the kindest person in the universe, and my father was,
Not.
Yeah. That's a really long story.
we can continue east and maybe come back to that
Yeah,
story.
I think it's probably farther than you're going to want to get into.
Okay. Well, we're having dinner after this, so maybe
Oh, we are.
we'll
Okay.
hear it
Well,
at
I'll
dinner.
just say one thing. My mother was not only the kindest person in the universe, she was also very beautiful in high school, and people had a crush on her, and she was a beautiful singer. She had a beautiful voice, and she had 6 months of college, and she came home for the summer, having taken voice lessons, and discovered her father shot himself.
Oh,
She's the one who found him.
egads.
So the violence runs all the way through. Needless to say, you can imagine what it did to her.
But it stopped with you and your brothers. And again, hats off
But
to
it
y'all.
stopped. It stopped, and we finally, very quickly. I mean, finally, at the end of her life, my father was gone already. He went to sleep one day and didn't wake up. And my mother, for the next 10 years, she was gradually declining, and we got her into a really good home.
Nice.
And she had, for the last 10 years of her life, she had the kind of peace and stability that she had never had all her life.
Right. That's
So in that sense, we saved her.
yeah. That's so lovely. So let me ask this: when you're take you back to Pomona, when you're doing the art stuff and you're seeing your project, you've got this sort of like angelic mom and this like devil of a father. You know, these boxes you described as being sort of, you said you went to your professor, said, I want to do something about angels.
Yeah.
Was that to some degree about your mom?
You know, I've never made that connection, but you're probably absolutely right. But more than that, also because I was very interested in the history of perception, philosophy of perception, Merleau-Ponty, and so on.
Uh-huh.
And perception is all cooked up in the brain. And then I got involved in Buddhism much later. And the Buddhist teachings about the senses and the reality that creates are profound, unbelievably profound. But anyway, the senses create our reality, and yet outside, in the boxes that I created, outside each box, there was another reality.
Right.
That was reflected out beyond the edge. And they looked real, but of course they weren't.
Right.
The extra boxes, I mean. They go back into an infinity, and they go out to on either side to another kind of infinity.
Sounds beautiful. And honestly, God, thinking now of that as you describe it is potentially a tribute to your mom. It gets extra beautiful.
Never occurred to me, but I think you're right. I think it's the kindness. Kindness expands the world in a way that anger contracts it and squashes it.
Right.
The world. Anger squashes the world until it can only be combated.
Right.
There's nothing but combat. Kindness moves out beyond the edges of what we think of as real. And it moves out into places that we see, even if we know that they're not quote unquote real in that way.
Right.
You know what I mean? So every day these days, I practice with Tibetans now. And every day I do a prayer that comes from the Buddha. And it begins, may everyone be happy and safe, and may their lives be filled with joy. And it goes on from there.
Lovely.
Buddha's words.
But it also, I mean, those are words of kindness.
Total kindness. And no matter, this whole prayer is called a metta prayer. It's very famous, and anybody can look it up. And it's really powerful. And the interesting thing about it is that it's so, obviously, quote unquote, it's absurd that, that everybody should be happy and safe and their hearts be filled with joy. On the one hand. On the other hand, I find that when I say these words every day, I say them literally every day, twice a day, I expand. And I change my own perception of what is possible.
Right.
And I move out beyond my own edges. So I think you're right, Nora. I think that's a really good insight.
What a beautiful thing. I just so love all the things you were just saying, but especially the thought that kindness expands the world.
Yes.
Like I could just sit with that and think
Yes.
about that beautiful thought for hours.
Yeah.
So how did you first become attracted to Buddhism?
Wow. So, okay, very quick history. So I started writing at the Real Paper, and that continued for about 6 years, and then the Real Paper died a painful death because it was communally owned,
Right.
fell apart in that regard. So then I moved to New York and wrote for the Village Voice for a year, and so from the time that I started writing at New York Magazine, I was on a weekly deadline for at least the next 25 years.
Egads.
Because after I wrote the Voice for a year, and then New York Magazine picked me up, and I started writing a weekly art column.
Art critic had left.
Yeah, Thomas Hess had left.
Thomas
Hess, H-E-S-S, and they picked me out of the Village Voice, and I remember distinctly saying to the editor of the Village Voice, who didn't like me because no, anyway, never mind.
Who was the editor at that point in time?
His name was Schneiderman.
Right. It was, and I remember living in New York City when I first got there. I mean, it was a famous job, and when there was turnover at the helm of the Village Voice, it was big news everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I walked into his office and I said, I just won the lottery.
Nice.
The New York Magazine picked me up.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what did he say, this boss?
He looked really unhappy. He was really pissed.
He's like, I need you here so I can dislike you.
No. I dislike you enough that I don't want you to get anything like that.
Kindness is not expanding his universe.
It's not expanding into his world. That's true.
No.
So I wrote for New York Magazine for 14 years, and then then after that I was writing for the New York Times and various other places.
Let me stick with New York Magazine for a second.
Okay.
So every week you would write about probably one feature and maybe a couple of sort of like blurbs on shows you'd seen that.
Not blurbs; they were reviews.
No, but one feature review, and then maybe a couple of other things that you'd seen.
It varied. I mean, if it was an important exhibition, I'd devote the whole column to it.
Right.
Matisse, I saw the Matisse exhibition at the Metropolitan by myself with a guard.
Oh, that must have been kind of dreamy.
It was, it was at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, sorry. But I also saw things at the Metropolitan also the same way. Just me and a guard.
What a blast.
Oh, it was incredible. I can't bear to go stand in a zillion crowds these days in museums because I was spoiled back then.
Almost worth getting your press credentials again.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, exactly.
So, but every week you'd go see a bunch of shows, I'm guessing.
Every week I would see as much as I could physically handle.
And when was your deadline for the magazine, and what day did the magazine come out?
So my deadline was always Monday morning at 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Which means that I never had a Sunday.
Ugh.
And in fact, I'd finish the column at 4 a.m. on Monday.
Sure, of course.
And I'd take it in sort of shell-shocked, and then the copy editor would go over it. And then when did the magazine come out? I think it was a Friday. I forget now. It takes time to set. But that was back in the days of cold type. You remember cold type?
Uh-huh.
Where you actually, typed in, a compositor typed in the little metal letters and had to pick out a letter and exchange it for the correct letter if it was wrong.
Oh boy,
it's incredible what people went through.
Amazing. So you did that for a number of years.
14 years.
And already you listed a couple of memorable exhibitions.
Oh, I saw everything, and it was amazing. I saw everything, and I got to write about what I wanted to write about.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was there ever any pressure? Like, the publisher's, cousin's having a show at Gladstone. Can you cover that?
I would have refused to do that.
Okay. Separation of church and state.
Yeah, exactly. But no, nobody ever did that. My editor was very smart. He wouldn't have done that.
Right.
Ed Kosner, he was very smart. But no, I mean, the difficult part was to see everything all the time.
Right.
And my legs wore out, and my brain wore out. Anyway.
But your late 20s, I'm guessing, early through your 30s, maybe?
Yeah, so that was 1980. Yeah, so I forget how old I was.
So, but it was not just the big museum shows. You saw a lot of gallery shows, too, on 57th Street or Soho or the East Village.
Oh, I went everywhere. I went to the East Village. I went to Brooklyn if I had to. I went to...
I like that. Brooklyn if I had to.
Well, it's just not many galleries at the time were in Brooklyn.
Right.
That's what I mean.
Right.
There are many more now.
So which of the commercial galleries had sort of like the highest hit rate for you? You're like, I just know I'm going to love the thing at Metro Pictures or whatever.
Well, so the interesting thing is that they don't exist anymore.
Right.
57th Street was the big street in those days. There were a lot of major galleries on 57th Street.
Yeah.
And now it's just clothing shops.
Ugh. When I moved to New York City, I lived on 62nd and Broadway, and I hit all the galleries on 57th Street because it was free.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I saw so much amazing stuff. And
That's right.
And they had their own sort of like art high-rises. You'd take the rickety elevator up to 6 and then see a show by Jonathan Borofsky or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was so good.
Yeah, and there were many people, many artists at that stage who were nowhere as big as they became. So it was a very interesting time. That was the early 80s.
Yeah.
Late 70s, early 80s. But so how did I come to Buddhism? So in the midst of that 14 years at New York Magazine, pretty much in the middle of it, the Japanese government, which had a lot of money in the 80s, and was inviting a group of 10 American or professionals in one field or another to Japan. And there was a year in which they invited art people, museum directors, curators, an art publisher, and me. And so...
what a treat.
I think it was mind-blowing. It opened my eyes in so many ways. And they took us to all the major Buddhist monuments.
Uh-huh.
And it was... Again, it
so
was
you
like
go to Kyoto and Tokyo.
Kyoto and Nara, and we saw contemporary art in Tokyo, and we went to historic sites. I mean, Horyuji, Temple of the Exalted Law, blew me away.
The what temple?
Temple of the Exalted Law, Horyuji.
Uh-huh.
That's the name of it. This was like, to use the metaphor that you're rightly resurrecting, it's like being in this reflecting box, and then I walk into Japan, and all of a sudden there's all this stuff going on beyond the box.
Right.
Things that weren't there but really were. I mean...
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so Horyuji.
Yeah.
I walk into Horyuji is the oldest... I hope I get this right, but I believe I'm right. Horyuji is the oldest wooden temple, Zen temple in the world.
Okay.
And I looked at it, and it just like split apart, and I saw the whole history of Buddhism in the middle of it.
You saw.
I felt it.
So what was that feeling? What do you call that feeling? What do you think happened? Because it's sort of like an interesting metaphysical thing you're describing.
Well, it's like the boxes which have this edge, and then beyond the edge, there's this other story of hundreds of years, thousands of years of people sitting in darkened silence in this place where the Buddhas reign.
Okay.
Okay. That's what that was the feeling. And it blew my mind.
And you felt the hundreds of years of people sitting there. You felt the sort of collective spirit of all of that.
I felt it, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And were you raised, I forget, did you say were you raised with some religion? Lutheran or?
Oh, Lutheran. Oh, yeah.
The
Sorry,
good
but-
old Swedes in the
good old
Midwest.
Swedes, exactly. And actually, my mother's family was German, so
Uh-huh.
they were even more Lutheran.
And were you confirmed in that church?
Oh yeah, of course.
And,
Sure.
and
I
did
didn't
you
know.
at some point turn your back on it?
It's not that I turned my back on it. I was just never totally interested. I was never interested.
Okay.
It was
But
not
if you were
important enough for me to be interested.
If you were confirmed, then you just
They did that. I didn't
went
do
along
that.
with your folks,
Yeah.
and then you just never pursued it.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you have this like magical, mystical,
Yeah.
metaphysical moment in this
Right.
temple.
Yeah. My mind expanded
Right.
to meet it. Expanded to meet whatever was there.
And so you had a great trip to Japan. You come
Right.
home,
I come home.
and now you've got this thing. You're like, I want to see what that's all about.
No.
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 Well, correct me
Because
if I'm
I had a
wrong.
weekly deadline.
Oh, geez.
Number one Uno starts first weekly deadline every time, no matter what.
Right.
And if I've heard a reporter comparing the deadline to running in front of a thresher machine.
Thresher.
You can't slip.
I'm sure
You
Grant
can't
Wood
slip.
painted one of
and
them.
yeah, probably so. Can't slip for a moment,
No.
or the thresher's going to get you.
Oh, geez. What an
So I
unfortunate
came
analogy.
back. I came back from Japan jet lagged, and I went out and did my deadline.
Right.
But a few weeks later, I got a letter from a guy who was the director of the Asian Society Galleries, who was inviting me to lunch because he was pushing an exhibition of Aboriginal Australian paintings that he was organizing, because he'd been out in the field with the Aborigines. He'd been touring all over Australia with the Aborigines
Nice.
and some anthropologists. And I never went to lunch with museum directors. But this time I said, I think I better go. And halfway through lunch, at that moment, we are still together 37 years later, put it that way.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Amazing.
37 years from that moment on.
And what's tell me again your husband's name?
Andy Pekarik.
Andy. So was he a practicing Buddhist at that point?
He was. He'd been practicing for a decade or so because he'd been in Japan, stationed in the Navy. He was in Navy in Japan.
Right.
And he had a Buddhist name, and he'd been studying with, Buddhism back then, but I didn't know any of this, of course.
So you had this sort of spiritual breakthrough in Japan
Yeah.
in this temple, and a few weeks
Yeah.
later you had no emotional
And then I had the
Cupid.
the what do I call it? The drop from heaven, the landing
Yeah.
in my palm, and saying,
Right.
"Oh,
Another angel straight from heaven.
another angel straight from heaven." And so I continued at New York Magazine for a while. This is going to answer your question.
Oh, I don't need answers to my questions.
I love not talking to you, Norma. I really do. But so, week after week, deadline after deadline. Okay, I'm getting pretty tired by now. After 20 plus years on a weekly deadline,
You're keeping a half a step ahead of the thresher.
I'm getting sick, keeping ahead of the thresher, and it's looking over my shoulder. Where's the thresher now? There's a new editor at New York Magazine. The old one decided he'd had enough of all these weekly deadlines, and he went off and started running some other paper. Actually, it was And there's a new editor at New York Magazine, and I walk into his office to say hello, and he can't look me in the face. He cannot look me in the face. He looks at the carpet. And I said, okay. And then about 2 weeks after that, I get a fax at 7 o'clock at night saying I'm no longer part of New York Magazine.
To your home fax machine.
My home fax machine, so I can't call him back. It's after hours. Nobody would answer. So I'm gone.
So this clown fired you
Yeah.
via fax,
Yes.
despite having you in his office and not being able to look you in the eye
Despite
because he
me
knew.
having been there for 14 years.
Oh, jeez.
Keeping ahead of the thresher the whole time.
Right.
And he was kind of a young hipster.
Right.
And needless to say, I was like dumbfounded about this. And then my husband, we were married at the time.
Uh-huh. Did your folks come to the wedding?
What?
Did your parents come to the wedding?
We eloped to Hawaii. I didn't want
Smart.
anybody to come to anything.
That's good.
I wanted to be just with him.
Let me just interject another question.
Okay.
Did they ever reach out to you? I mean, because, that's a pretty great job being the chief art critic for like the
only
chief
art
coverage magazine in the chief art capital of the world.
Universe of
it's
the
a
world,
huge job.
Yeah.
Did they ever like say, hey, we're kind of proud of you?
Did they say what?
Did your folks, your dad
Yeah.
especially, ever like say, hey, I'm proud of what you've done with your life?
Absolutely not. He was scared to death of it.
Right.
Because it was so alien to everything he knew.
Right.
But I didn't need them anymore.
No,
but
but still.
I needed the emotional connection. I never lost track of them.
Right.
I was always going back. But that's another story. No, I had no support from them. I knew from when I was 2 years old on. I knew that I had to make my own life because they weren't going to do it for me.
Right.
And then I did.
Yeah.
But then, so I got this fax.
Oh, right. Jeez.
7:00 at night, telling me I'm no longer at New York Magazine, not giving me any reason. And indeed, there was no reason that anybody could ever find. And Andy, my husband, the next morning says, I'm going off to Zen Mountain Monastery to start my Zen training weekend.
Which is up in the Catskills.
It's on the west side of Woodstock, New York, on the Catskills, right?
Yeah.
And it's a historic building that was a boys' camp way early on, and was transformed into a monastery for Zen Buddhism. And he was leaving literally the next morning. I told this story to a friend of mine, and she put her finger up in the air, like, "Oh, the wind is changing direction."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your friend for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you went with?
So he went to Zen training weekend. I was in shell shock for about six months.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and I had to sell the apartment. I had to do all this stuff. But when I finally did get up to our country house, which is where we still live, I said, okay, I'm going to try this Zen Buddhism thing myself.
And what drew you to it, apart from your great love, really loving it?
He was doing it. My husband was doing it.
Right.
So what is this all about? So.
Good reason.
So, long story short, so Buddhism has become incredibly important to me because not only does it show how we construct the world from our senses and also from the parts that are not our senses, from our our whole existential being, right? But it also shows me how my father was loaded with delusions and reactions and what we call in Buddhism samsara, which is the refusal of the world to take us kindly. He was all his anger, all his chaos, all his heat, emotional heat, was what we would call ignorance.
Okay.
Ignorance being not stupidity. Ignorance is like not understanding how you create your life in the world from moment to moment as you go along. You create it, and you can create it out of anger. You can create it out of kindness, and they're different, and they have different consequences. And they have different consequences not only for yourself but for the world, Right. And so, I began to see the structure of Buddhism as this place where the heart gets trained by these prayers I say every day, and by the practices I do. The heart gets trained, and the heart says, yeah, that's right. I feel it. I feel where the hard parts are, but I also feel something else. There's a beautiful quote by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. You know him? He's the he was the first Tibetan Buddhist to be born in Tibet and to come to America and to found a Tibetan Buddhist temple in Vermont.
Right.
I was just there because they do Kyudo, the Japanese bow technique there.
Oh, wow.
It just came from there.
Nice.
And there's a beautiful quote on the wall, a quote by Trungpa on the wall. And I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I did not memorize it exactly. But basically, Trungpa says, the quote says, you can, in front of you, you can pile up samsara and all its agonies, all its pain, all its horrors. You know, you can pile it up in front of you and you look at it. But then, if you go to the great western sky and the glory of the red sky, you know, and the gate of paradise, so to speak, and you put the two of them together, samsara and the gate of paradise, then you can make a cup of tea, says Trungpa.
Okay.
That's absolutely perfect. It's exactly right.
And what do you, I'm struggling with that. I'm working on it, trying to internalize it. What is absolutely perfect about that for you?
I look at all the pain.
Right.
My father's pain, my mother's pain, which was different.
Right.
My pain in relation to them, you know, and pain in other respects other things that have happened to me that are very painful. All the things that we do to each other that we can't avoid doing because we're soaked in ignorance. We don't know what we're doing. We don't have any way to frame another way of being.
Right.
So I look at all of that. I can put it in front of me. I can see the whole history of my family.
Right.
And of everybody else's too.
Okay.
And of other things going on right now in politics, which I'm not going to talk about.
Right.
Okay.
We only have 50 seconds left.
Okay. And then I see the expanded mind that is possible when you practice. And I say, put those two together and it's enough. Okay.
Okay.
And that's incredibly powerful to me.
Okay. Just amazing. I always love talking with you. We've got 20 seconds left. I'm going to use it to plug your book. I don't know if you saw the promo I did, but as I was sitting and thinking about what to write for social media about this, I realized this is probably one of my favorite books ever. Not probably, it definitely is, if not my very favorite book ever. And one of the reasons is I don't know any books that are as dog-eared and underlined and thumb scratched and highlighted than this one. And the book I'm referring to is called Where the Heart Beats, John Cage, Zen Buddhism and the Inner Life of Artists by my guest, Kay Larson. Thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait to talk with you more.
Norm, I love this. I always love talking to you. We've been doing it for a while now, and I always love it.
We have. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Have a great Friday and a fabulous weekend.